Robservations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
I've heard it said before, like, it was a very smart man named Robert Meyer Burnett who said the currency of our current age is authenticity. And it's so true.
Imagination Connoisseurs Unlimited, in association with Max Allan Collins, presents True Noir, the fully immersive 10-chapter audio drama with an all-star cast of favorite actors of yours, including people like Starbuck herself, Bo-Katan Kryze, Katie Sackhoff. That's right, she's in it. She was great in Longmire. We went after her for this, and we got her. She plays our main character, Nathan Heller's fiancée, Janie, and she will break your heart. Go over to our Kickstarter campaign at truenoir.co, or just go to Kickstarter and support this series if you want. When you hear it, and you're going to hear, with me, a brand new piece of music from composer Alexander Bornstien that you're listening to right now, but I haven't heard this yet, and you're going to hear it for the very first time tonight. Greetings, Imagination Connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, which, I always say that, but I have no wine. I'm still getting wine from our great benefactor, but I don't drink it on the show anymore, which is sad. Your evangelist of the imagination, your imagination, my imagination, her imagination, or she who might live in your imagination. And, of course, your existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, me, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I am Rob-casting it you. You imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. This is Robservations episode number 983. I have to think. I can't believe I've done 983 of these episodes. And then however many thousands of episodes I've been on YouTube. And are you sick of me yet? Are you sick of me yet? Well, maybe you're not, because, hey, we're getting more subscribers and more people, and I want to give a big thank you to a lot of new subscribers and a lot of the kind words that you have been throwing my way. And look, remember, just so you know, all the nicknames that have come before, I did not make these up. People made these up for me, and then people made artwork. If you want to call me something, it could be good, could be bad, but if it comes with a piece of artwork, I'll put it at the front of this show. Alvaro Zenos Amaro, who wrote this book, Equimedian, that you all should read. This is the hardcover version. He actually sent me a bunch of new nicknames. But the thing is, I feel like I can't just use them. I've got to find somebody to do the artwork. So maybe if you're all out there, maybe I'll just go to Fiverr, or for shame, I'll use AI, even though I don't believe in that. Anyway, what's going to happen? You young whippersnappers, you're going to believe in it, and it won't matter what I think. But you'll hear me Robserve about it, I'm sure. But anyway, thanks for being here. Now, I got to tell you, so Deadpool and Wolverine, I was of two minds about it. I did a show about it. You've all heard my opinion. It was an enjoyable romp. But as a film, I wanted more. I really enjoyed the first Deadpool, and I loved how it was many different things to many different people. And it all worked very cohesively together. And while I think that Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman made the movie they set out to make, I still feel that the story that was being told, it could have been within the context of what Deadpool and Wolverine were doing. I wanted it more Days of Future Past. But I also don't think it's fair. It's not fair to judge a movie by what it isn't. You can only judge a movie by what it is. The problem is, Logan and Days of Future Past are great Wolverine stories. And, I really enjoy both of those stories. I enjoy both of those movies and the original stories that they're based on. But it got me thinking, I've been thinking a lot, inordinate amounts probably, about the character of Wolverine. That I've always enjoyed the character of Wolverine. And I think that while Wolverine was introduced in the pages of The Incredible Hulk, I think as Wolverine went along, he was mostly defined by his relationship to the X-Men. And sure, he had his own book and, went to Madripoor and all of that. But I think that Chris Claremont had a lot to do, and the X-Men had a lot to do with cementing his enduring popularity. And, I've never spoken about this yet, but I've thought about it. There was some controversy. Roy Thomas, the great comic writer and editor, who was editor at Marvel, he wasn't writing Wolverine, but he was an editor. And there was some controversy in that he, in Deadpool and Wolverine, is credited as one of the co-creators of Wolverine. Now, at the time, I'm going to give you my opinion. This is my opinion. An editor on a comic book, I've had editors before. I wrote for Sci-Fi Universe magazine. I wrote an essay that was in a book called The Cyberpunk Nexus. I had an editor there, and I've had other editors throughout my life. And the thing is, editors are there to make suggestions, to offer ideas, to throw things out. But if an editor is working on your story or your article or whatever, they don't request a byline. It's understood that an editor doesn't get a byline for something that you've written. Editors' jobs are to throw out ideas and offer suggestions, wise pearls, whatever it is that you need. That's what an editor does. But an editor doesn't take any kind of a co-creating credit on work that people under their editorship, what's the proper term? They usually don't take credit. Well, lately, and especially in the end credits of Deadpool and Wolverine, editor Roy Thomas gets a co-creation credit. And there's a lot of people up in arms about that, especially I'm one of them. I was very incensed by this. I thought it was in particularly poor taste. I mean, I know they say history is won by the victors, but we're living in, I did a story, I did a Robservation show a couple of shows ago about sincerity. And I believe we live in a deeply insincere culture on a number of different levels, which is dismaying to me for a lot of reasons. But I've admired Roy Thomas. I have a lot of his work on my shelves back here. But I found the interviews that he's been doing lately, and I don't want to, disparage somebody I've been a fan of, but I found them in particular poor taste. I knew Len Wein. I knew his wife. I still know his wife, Christine Vallata, who has actually in the past got me on a lot of interesting panels and interesting things, and Len was just a wonderful guy. But I wanted to read a piece before I jumped into the Wolverine, the enduring popularity of this great character. But I wanted to just delve into this for a minute. Wolverine, Marvel's Roy Thomas speaks out on the controversy. Now, this article was published on April 1st. It's not an April Fool's joke. And it was written by Rob Salkowitz for Forbes magazine. When readers of Marvel's Incredible Hulk 180, cover dated October 1974, got to the last page, they were greeted with a brand new character, a feisty Canadian with adamantium claws and an attitude as big as the Great White North, identified as Weapon X, but known to posterity as Wolverine. The issue was written by Len Wein, who died in 2018, and drawn by Herb Trimpe, who died in 2015. Wolverine's costume was designed by longtime Marvel artist and art director John Romita Sr., who died in 2023, at the instigation of then Marvel editor-in-chief Roy Thomas. None of the people involved knew at the time, but Wolverine was destined to become the most popular Marvel character of the past 50 years, down to the present day when he is co-headlining the what was upcoming then in April, Deadpool and Wolverine movie, and Disney's breakout animated series X-Men 97. For decades, comics historians and Marvel have given official credit for the character's creation to Wein and Romita, while noting the original contributions of Trimpe and Thomas, as well as the subsequent work of Chris Claremont, John Byrne, Frank Miller, and others, who helped mold Wolverine into the compelling character and global icon he is today. Recently, that's changed, with Thomas's name being added to the official creator credits. And many comics industry professionals popped their own claws, Wolverine style, at the thought of it. The change in credits was first reported by longtime comic book editor Bobby Chase, related on her Facebook page over the weekend. She wrote, "My friend and Len Wein's widow, Christine Vallada, got a call from Marvel executive David Bogart informing her that in the upcoming Wolverine and Deadpool movie coming out this July, Roy Thomas will now be credited as the co-creator with Len Wein and John Romita Jr. Sr., and David said, it's a done deal. I was standing in Christine's kitchen this past Sunday as she told me about the phone call. Of course, Christine is seriously concerned about Len's legacy. Len was profoundly important to the comic book industry, and that legacy is being challenged for the worse 6 years after his death. This set off a firestorm of controversy, with many comics professionals, and creators chiming in to give a largely negative opinion of Thomas's bid to get credit 50 years after the fact, when almost all of the people with direct knowledge of the situation are dead. I spoke to Roy Thomas, 83, by telephone for his perspective on the situation. Remember, he's 83 now, which he was eager to clarify. He says, this is Roy Thomas, "This situation is unfortunate because I'm only trying to finally get credit for something where the facts have been known for many years, and I'm being portrayed as a ghoul trying to rob the corpse of Len Wein for credit and money," he said. "First and foremost, this is not a financial issue. I'm not getting a penny, as far as I know, and it is in no way takes away from whatever Len and John their families may be getting, if anything. I don't know what their financial arrangement is with Marvel. I'm already getting money from my other contributions to Marvel. I don't need Wolverine money, thank you very much." What he is receiving is formal acknowledgement from Marvel Studios of his role in the process, something noted less explicitly in the creator thanks credits in the previous films like Logan. Prior to then, Wolverine was appearing in films produced by 20th Century Fox, and Marvel didn't have involvement, he said. Tell that to Kevin Feige. Deadpool Wolverine is a Marvel movie, so they decided to look at my claims. What claims are those, Roy? That you were editor fulfilling the job of an editor by throwing out ideas to your creators? Thomas explained that, as editor-in-chief of Marvel in 1974, he first conceived of developing a Canadian character to include in the comics to broaden the appeal. We had an international readership, and I had created international characters like Xmen, Banshee, and Sunfire before, he said. I had 4 requirements for the character: that he be named Wolverine, be Canadian, be fierce because Wolverines are fierce creatures, and that he be short because superheroes are usually tall. Thomas said he wanted to introduce the character in The Incredible Hulk because the Hulk was one of the few Marvel characters not based in New York, and it would be more plausible to set the action in Canada. Thomas assigned the job to Wein, who he described as one of the company's best writers, confident that he would bring a unique spin to it. I could have assigned it to a different writer using my 4 parameters and John Romita's design. Wolverine would have been something different because it wasn't Len writing it, but I still would have been co-creator. Though Thomas said there were no contemporary records or documents to substantiate this account, and nearly everyone with first-hand knowledge is now deceased, he said he has been telling the same story for decades, including in a 1982 interview with Marvel staff comics historian Peter Sanderson, and that his collaborators Trimpe, Romita, and even occasionally Wein would corroborate it when asked. "Anyone who knows me knows I've never been shy about speaking up," he said. One of the aspects of the situation that is ruffling feathers in the comics community is the idea of a staff editor taking a piece of the credit for the work of freelance creative teams. This is not the usual practice in the industry, despite many historical examples of editors ranging from DC's Julius Schwartz, Justice League of America, to Vertigo's Karen Berger, Sandman, and Doom Patrol having a significant and acknowledged role in bringing the concepts to life. Thomas acknowledged that offering suggestions to creative teams was part of his job as editor-in-chief, but said the situation with Wolverine was extraordinary. "I wasn't usually involved in the creation of characters as editor," he said. "If I made up a character, it was usually for a comic I was writing. In this case, I did make up my character, and whether or not it was my job or not, it doesn't mean I wasn't co-creator. To suggest otherwise is a bunch of crap as far as I'm concerned. Offering attributes, in my opinion, is not necessarily co-creating a character. You know, you could say somebody's a certain skin type or a certain religious background or whatever. Those are attributes, but you're not creating a character. That's in my humble opinion." Thomas also said he would not dream of taking credit for other characters that debuted when he was in charge, as he did not have a personal hand in shaping them. He also volunteered that one of the characters he is credited with co-creating, Marvel's The Vision, from his 1960s run on the Avengers, was done under similar circumstances, instigated by then Marvel editor-in-chief Stan Lee. They gave me and artist John Buscema the credit, and that makes sense, but if Stan wanted credit, I could have gladly shared it with him, as well as with Jack Kirby, who created the 1940s character on whom Thomas's vision is partly based, he said. Thomas addressed how the situation might be upsetting to the families of his co-creators, who might see their contributions diluted by the 11th hour inclusion of another name on the credits. I don't think this dilutes Len Wein's legacy, because he has always been recognized for writing these stories and for everything he brought to the character, including bringing Wolverine into the X-Men in 1975, he said. I'm not trying to take anything away from anyone, I just want credit for what I did. You were editor-in-chief of Marvel and made suggestions to your creators. That's what you did. That was your job. Just like Stan Lee suggested things for your creation of the Vision, that was a riff on a character that had already been created. I just want credit for what I did. If there's Wolverine money from Disney, I hope his widow gets rich off it. I've got my own. I don't need Len's or hers. Finally expressing exasperation at the tenor of the online discussion, Thomas summed up that this is, for him, as both a creator and comics historian, about setting the record straight. If somebody created a character, whether it's about money or not, they should be acknowledged. He said it took longer than 50 years for Batman co-creator Bill Finger to finally share billing with Bob Kane. Just because it took a long time to get the real story out doesn't make it untrue. And then read the response from Christine Vallada, widow of Len Wein, in part 2 of the story here, which I'm going to read. So we're going on. It's once again by Rob Salkowitz. It's about stolen valor, says Len Wein's widow on the Wolverine credit controversy. The old saying that success has 1,000 parents is never more true than in a collaborative medium like comics, where the creation of characters can involve many people adding essential ingredients to the mix. Ask the writer who was the creator, and they'll tell you it was the writer. Ask the artist, they'll say the artist or art director. Ask the editor, well, you get the idea. And in the passage of time, shifting or self-serving recollections, and the mortality of many of the key participants, and you end up with a real mess. When the character in question is Wolverine, Marvel's most popular and bankable creation of the last 50 years, and a centerpiece of nearly a dozen films and a multi-billion-dollar franchise, add another billion this weekend, the issue of creation takes on a high stakes, whether or not money is involved. That's why a recent adjustment of creator credits on one of Disney's showcase IPs have set off such a firestorm of controversy. Last week, former Marvel editor Bobby Chase broke the news on Facebook that Marvel had informed Christine Vallada, the widow of original Wolverine writer and co-creator Len Wein, that Roy Thomas, Marvel's editor-in-chief at the time, was being added as a credited co-creator alongside Wein and John Romita Sr. on the hotly anticipated Deadpool and Wolverine feature film this summer. The report gained traction on social media, where numerous comics professionals chimed in on the unseemliness of Thomas, the last surviving member of the creative team, claiming a credit that rarely, if ever, is accorded to an editor. Goddamn right. In a piece that ran here on Monday, I reached out to Roy Thomas to give him an opportunity to address the matter. In addition to presenting his case for co-creator status by pointing out his fundamental contributions to the character and the testimony of several of his now-deceased creative colleagues, Thomas, 83, also emphasized that he has not asked for financial consideration. He said he was simply seeking formal recognition for a role in the process that has been long acknowledged in comics history. Christine Vallada, an entertainment and copyright attorney, that's Len's wife, in Los Angeles specializing in creator rights issues, took exception to many of the points made in the story. Vallada, who met Wein in 1989 and married him in 1991, manages her late husband's estate, both credit and financial compensation from Disney, since 2014. Wein himself died in 2017. I'm not privy to what the financial arrangements might be with Thomas, and I don't particularly care, Vallada said in a phone interview on April 2nd. This is not about finances, this is about stolen valor. This frankly calls my husband a liar for his entire career. Len Wein co-created DC's Swamp Thing with artist Bernie Wrightson, credited with creating dozens of characters for DC, Marvel, and other publishers, succeeded Thomas as Marvel's editor-in-chief in 1974, and had a distinguished career as a writer and editor. He was inducted into the Will Eisner Hall of Fame in 2008. Many consider his credit as co-writer of Wolverine the feather in his cap, and one that he was exceptionally proud of, according to Vallada. Vallada says Wein remained consistent in his account of the character's creation since the beginning. while acknowledging that Thomas had assigned him to introduce a Canadian character named Wolverine in The Incredible Hulk, which Wein was writing. Wein said he did all the original research that shaped Wolverine's powers and personality. Wein, who also studied art in college, claimed he even contributed to John Romita's character design. This last point is disputed by Herb Trimpe, the artist who drew the first Wolverine stories, who died in 2015. In an interview that took place in 2012, Trimpe said, "I was in the office a good part of the time, and I was there when John Romita was working on the model of the character. The way it worked was Roy Thomas came up with a concept. It was his. He came up with the name of the character, Wolverine, and he handed it directly over to John Romita in the bullpen to develop a character sheet, which he then gave to Len Wein, who was the writer at the time." Trimpe continued, "I don't want to take away anybody's ability to make a few bucks, but it was Roy's concept and John's character design. The writer, in my opinion, gave the character a voice and actually collaborated with the artist in terms of bringing the character to life, which is no small thing, but it's not really the originator of the concept." Valor disagrees. She said she has great respect for editors, but said that you can never compare what they do in the course of their staff jobs with the toil that writers and artists put in bringing ideas to life, which I totally agree with. It's their sweat and blood that goes into the creation, while editors go home and collect their paychecks, she said. It's simply not true that Roy was in any way, shape, or form a co-creator of the character. To me, co-creator means that he either contributed to the writing of the story, or he contributed artwork, and he didn't do either. He made suggestions, as an editor does. She cited the example of Len Wein himself, whose career included several notable editorial roles. The list of characters created while Len was editor-in-chief at Marvel is several pages long, Valor said. Of course, he was editor of Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' Watchmen at DC. He would never dream of taking the co-creator status on anything he edited, no matter what he contributed to the process. Thomas, in his interview, said he was open to the idea of reconsidering the creative role of editors throughout comics history, including for characters that he is credited with creating as a writer. Valor was unimpressed. "I have one word for that. Bullshit," she said. She also took exception to the claim Thomas made in the interview that he had not taken credit for other characters that appeared when he was Marvel's editor-in-chief, citing the example of a character called Brother Voodoo, who Len Wein created in an issue of Strange Tales, and who ended up having a tangential connection to a character appearing in Marvel Studios' Doctor Strange. Valor said that Wein considered Thomas a close friend and does not recall them having any bad blood over this or any such issue when her husband was alive. Thomas cited one example where he had seen a photo of Wein at a convention with a booth banner that identified him as creator of Wolverine, and spoke to him about neglecting Romita, Trimpe, and his own contributions. Valor remembered the incident and noted that the offending banner, which was produced by an assistant, was quickly replaced at subsequent appearances. He always called himself the writer-creator as distinct from the artist-creator, she said. The bottom line for Valor is the affront she perceives in someone else horning in on her late husband's hard-earned legacy. "Professionally, I take pretty strong stances protecting creators' rights, even before I met Len," she said. "Anybody who knows me knows that of Len's character, Wolverine is the one I most identify with. Seeing Roy Thomas's name as co-creator makes me sick to my stomach," she said. "The man should have stayed in his lane as the editor, taking his accolades for that, and not try and usurp credit that he's not due and that he has not earned. If I sit back and let this roll by, where will it stop? It's only going to get worse." Valor says it's not too late for Disney and Marvel to walk back this move. Look, what NBC Universal did last week, reversing course after the hiring RNC chair Ronna McDaniel, caused an uproar. They should say, "Look, we made a mistake," and people will be very impressed that they were able to acknowledge that in the name of truth. Disney, which is having a highly consequential shareholder meeting on April 3rd, did not immediately reply to requests for comment. Well, there you go. I thought I'd bring that up before I delve into the creation or the character of Wolverine. And for me, an editor is an editor, and throwing out ideas for attributes doesn't make them. Lots of people have ideas, especially in Hollywood. I have this idea for a sitcom. And then when the sitcom comes out, that was my idea. Somebody took it. No, somebody made it. You had an idea. Somebody else took that idea and made it, or might not have even talked to you, but had a similar idea and made it flesh. Put in the work. So having an idea is never enough. And I'll tell you something. In my 36 years working in the entertainment business, I've seen a lot of people who have ideas, but very few of them actually take the time to implement those ideas and turn them into something tangible. Characters, movies, whatever you want. So for me, an idea is never enough. Suggestions are never enough. You have to go and create it. You have to go write it. You have to go draw it. You have to go film it. You have to go record it. Whatever it is you have to do. Of course, nowadays, now you can just have a prompt and suddenly you've created something. We're going to be living in a deeply insincere world when it comes to the creation of art. People that said, oh, look what I made. I did this. I just sat here at a keyboard. The blood, sweat, and tears that anybody's going to have to put in to conceive of something that doesn't exist is now only a few keystrokes away. What that is going to do, not just to artists, but to our culture at large. Well, if you follow Justine Bateman on Twitter, she has a lot to say about it. But I think that's going to be something that we as a people, as entities, as living beings, where art has always been incredibly important to how we define ourselves. It is indeed art in how the human animal defines our own existence. And to see art taken away from artists and given to everybody, you could say that's democratization. The problem is when you don't understand what it is that you're creating, you don't understand things like color theory, you don't understand things like the design of a frame or anything like that, it is fraudulent creation. All you're doing is having something else take all the work other people have done and rearrange it into a new form. That isn't creation. I don't know what that is, but it's something I think we're going to have to come to terms with, and come to terms with very quickly. I don't know. What do you guys think? Go down there in the chat and tell me. Listen, I just I just realized I had my internet replaced here today. It's faster. But I forgot to plug the power in, as I'm noticing on my computer, and it's going to go out. So if you'll stick with me, I'm going to play you. I just got this in. This is a brand new piece of music from our composer, our true noir composer, Alexander Bornstien. I have not heard this, so this is why I'm so excited about this project. This is a brand new piece of music for our 10-part fully immersive audio drama. We have an original score from composer Alexander Bornstien. It's not just synthesized. He brings in real horn players and real percussionists to play on these tracks. I have not even heard this piece of music, but I'm going to play it for you. It's only 90 seconds long, so I can walk around and plug my computer in so it doesn't turn off during the middle of the show. So this is a world premiere for all of you. It's a piece of music of Alexander Bornstein's score for True Noir. So check it out. You won't hear the fans blowing in here, and you can see the sweat coming down my brow, but I hope you enjoy this. Hey, where else do you get this on YouTube? Well, I hope you guys enjoyed that. I couldn't hear it. So you've actually heard some of True Noir that I haven't heard yet. So there you go. As you all know, I've been working on this project. We've been in production on it since April. It's one of my favorite things I've ever worked on. I'm very, very proud of it. The cast is a murderer's row of actors you know and love. And Max Allan Collins, of course, who wrote Batman, who created the detective comic series Mystery. He has written one of the best scripts, honestly, not hyperbole, one of the best scripts I've ever read. That's an adaptation of his novel True Detective that came out, an award-winning novel that came out in 1983. So thanks for listening to that, and it allowed me to plug in the computer so I can continue to do this show for you, imagination connoisseurs. Now, so Wolverine, like, I have to tell you, I started reading X-Men back in the very early 80s. And one of the things that brought me back to comic books, I've talked before about a kid named Robbie Cullen was reading Camelot 3000, issue number 4, on his front stoop when I was delivering papers on my paper route. And I had never seen a Baxter paper comic book. DC was putting out. The direct sale market had risen, and Marvel had put out Moon Knight and Khazar and Micronauts as their first 3 direct sale only comics. And DC was switching over to their not prestige format. Those are the square-bound comics, like Dark Knight Returns was a prestige format book. But I had never seen white Baxter paper before. And Brian Boland's art, I was immediately smitten, and it got me back into the comic book store. And I quickly discovered New Teen Titans, George Perez and Marv Wolfman. Still, I think I grew up as a Justice League of America kid, but I think New Teen Titans, at least the first 100 issues, might be maybe my favorite team book of all time, until, of course, there was a crossover. There was a crossover with the X-Men. And back then, X-Men and Teen Titans were like the most popular books. And I was immediately smitten by our favorite mutants. And the X-Men quickly became, to me, the Star Trek version. The way I feel about Star Trek as far as TV, X-Men was kind of like that. And I know I've been reading comics. I've been reading X-Men since the early 80s. So sue me. I love the X-Men. And obviously, when a friend of mine wound up, Bryan Singer, who I'd gone to film school with and I'd been friends with since he made his first short film that got some attention, that got him the money to make Lion's Den, which was that was the short that got him the money to make Public Access. I've known him since then, and when he got the job directing X-Men, I couldn't believe it. And when DVDs really took off, Dave Parker and I were hired by Brian to produce special features for the re-release of X-Men as X-Men 1.5 and X2. So for me personally, I got to go up to the Vancouver set of X-Men 2. I filmed material that we used on the X-Men 1 DVD, and then I was on the sets, and one of the first things, they had built these gigantic, Guy Hendricks Dias, the production designer, who's amazing, had built the Cerebro set. I can't explain to you what it was like to be on the set of X-Men 2. I got to see the Weapon X chambers, I got to see where Xavier and Stryker and and Legion were. It was insane. It was absolutely it was nerd nirvana, imagination connoisseur nirvana, being on that set. And I went back and forth a number of times, shooting behind the scenes material and shooting interviews. And it's funny because personally, people have always said to me, well, Rob, if you know so much about the entertainment business, how come you're not rich and famous and more successful? Which is a great point. But the thing is, I've kind of jumped between, I've never made anything that was totally commercially successful. I think Free Enterprise would be a lot more successful if it had come out now. But I've been able to do a lot of things I'm particularly proud of. You might have seen that Bloody Disgusting had a list of the 5 best horror movies about making movies, and number 1 on their list was The Hills Run Red, which was a movie that I developed at my company, Ludovico Technique. Dave Parker directed. My friend Dave Scow, who was a novelist friend of mine, he wrote the first movie I ever worked on, which was Leatherface, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 in 1989. That's where I met him, and I already owned some of his books. And in 2008, we started working on it in 2006, and in 2008, we went to Sofia, Bulgaria, and produced a movie. And for me, that was an epic win. And while it's not a well-known movie, from my perspective, it was to make a horror film that Rob Galuzzo, that I had on last night, wrote a 5-page article in Fangoria about. To me, for me personally, that was an epic win. So to be standing on the set of X-Men 2 or X2 with Brian, who I'd known for, at that point 15 years almost, and to be standing on the set of an X-Men movie, seeing, when Barry Windsor Smith did the Weapon X, that serialized storyline, it was crazy, and it was fucking Wolverine. I mean, for me personally, and they were paying me, Marvel's not paying me, 20th Century Fox was paying me a lot of money, not an insubstantial amount of money, but 6 figures to produce special features, 6 figures for each movie, in the low 6 figures, but still not a bad paycheck to go fly up to Vancouver and film some of your favorite comic book characters brought to life by the Captain of the Enterprise, and Halle Berry, and Xenia Onatopp from GoldenEye. I mean, it's hard to explain to people how much fun I've actually had in my life throughout my career. Would I like to be rich and famous? Sure, because it would make things easier. But I wouldn't change what I've done for the world. I tell you that. I've had regrets in my personal life, but there's some girls out there, I'd like to go back and apologize to. Maybe. No, I'm just kidding. Well, sort of. But it was a great time, and it meant so much to me, and to see some of the footage from our documentaries that I made during that time on a movie screen 2 weeks ago. I didn't know that was coming. And Dave Parker, who edited all that stuff with me and we made it together, said to me, he goes, "You're not going to believe some of our documentary footage made it into the Deadpool and Wolverine movie." I was like, "What?" And I'm sitting in the theater and the credits are rolling. I'm like, my God. So do I get credit for that? No. But unlike, Roy Thomas, I should probably say, well, you need to give me money for that. No. But it was still, for me, I didn't, I don't need acknowledgement or payment for that. It was something we did as work for hire. And I would never claim that someone owes me money for that, but it's something that I was paid for and I did for 20th Century Fox that is now in an MCU movie. So it's great. So the Wolverine character has always meant something to me, and I personally have always looked at Wolverine as kind of a Western character. And I think that he, he's very much a man's man, and yet he has a tragic backstory. And yet I see him as sort of a haunted gunfighter. We all know his origins, and we all know where he came from now and what happened to him. And plus, add to the fact that he's a mutant. But really, he's just a fucking badass. And like all great, Western characters or great heroes, whether it's Steve McQueen in Bullet or Lee Marvin, take your pick, or whoever your favorite, Humphrey Bogart, all of the great male characters, those archetypes, Toshiro Mifune to a certain extent in samurai movies, or a movie like High and Low where he's not a samurai. These are the kind of characters that Wolverine is derived from. Classic, but you just love him because he's a badass, and he's a hopeless romantic. He's still in love with Jean Grey, or he goes to Japan and falls in love, and look what happened then. The guy can't catch a break. And that's where Frank Miller came into Wolverine's story as an artist, working with Chris Claremont. But before I found an article about Wolverine that was recently published, I wanted to read something, and Stubble McShave's going to love this. Brandon Sanderson, who's making millions and millions of dollars over on Kickstarter, he took over the Wheel of Time series from Robert Jordan. He has what he calls, Sanderson's laws. And they're about fiction writing. And in this article about Wolverine that I'm going to share with you, they cited this article, this law, Sanderson's second law. And I thought that this was really interesting to share because it speaks to character and what makes great characters for us, and what we as imagination connoisseurs really dig when we are talking about characters. And by the way, before I jump into it, why don't I read some of your super chats? We got some super stickers. Roger Paulson sends in a $5 super sticker. He's laughing at me. The Real Deal with Tom K sends in a super sticker, and thank you for that, Tom K. I don't know the names of these super stickers. I should know them off. I don't get super stickers very often, so starting this show with that is great. And The Real Deal with Tom K, this, I believe, is their first time they've ever sent in a super chat on this channel, so thank you, The Real Deal. You are the real deal. Our friend MajorChaiChai, agree with you, Rob. Deadpool and Wolverine was good, but Wolverine's arc was generic and vague, and the goofiness of the film dampened his redemption story. I agree. Daren L. from Minnesota. He's now a member of the channel. He's an imagination connoisseur. MajorChaiChai, it does not surprise me. You and I agree on that end. So, Daren, thank you, and you have sent in also a super chat. Daren also says, hey, Rob, thoughts on the Star Wars Skeleton Key trailer and its tone akin to Goonies and Stranger Things? Looks fun. Also, SNG Season 3 looks, Strange New Worlds, you mean, looks abysmal. Sorry. Live long and prosper. Well, Daren, let me tell you, I watched the Skeleton Crew trailer, and I thought it had a lot of E.T. vibes to me. It also had some Star Trek Prodigy vibes, if you watch that animated show, which is not bad. And, of course, Stranger Things and Goonies, which isn't necessarily, I mean, it looks beautiful. I think it was one of the best, other than Andor, one of the best-looking Star Wars shows, but I really don't understand. Like, when I was a kid, I did not like things with kids in them because I was a kid. I liked Star Trek because I hoped to one day grow up and be friends with those guys. Even Star Wars, I was palatable because Luke was like 18 or 19. He was somebody I was going to grow up and be. When I was a kid, I was not a big fan of Lost in Space, not because Billy Mooney, Will Robinson himself, is also in True Noir. But I thought Lost in Space was silly that it was directed toward kids, even though Billy Mooney didn't bother me because I had known him over from the Twilight Zone, so he was a badass, and I knew what he did to people, and they made him mad. But I watched Skeleton Crew, and I'm like, when I was a kid and saw Star Wars, I loved it. And this idea, and I understand it's Disney, and look, the creative team is pretty great, and I'm a huge Jude Law fan. What do you know, Gigolo Joe? But I'm like, did anyone love the Ewok Adventure or Caravan of Courage or whatever? I mean, I understand why they're doing something like that, but I really don't understand the where people are taking these IPs. Kids, I believe. Now, we watch movies about kids because that's where I mean, when I was a kid, I saw the Disney movies, the live-action movies like Treasure of Matacumbe, Candle Shoe with Jodie Foster. You know, I love that. Or all the Dean Jones Herbie movies, or things like Cat from Outer Space. But I would watch the Computer Wore Tennis Shoes, or The Strongest Man in the World, the Kurt Russell, Dexter Riley movies, and I like them. But I never really liked, like when I was younger, I liked watching movies about kids in high school. And maybe by the time I was in junior high and high school, when The Goonies came out in, 85, I couldn't abide it. I'm like, I hate this fucking movie. Because the kids in that movie had no verisimilitude. I didn't buy it, you know. Josh Brolin and Martha Plimpton making out or whatever. That movie had gratuitous kissing. Even I was like beyond that at that point. But whatever. What do I think of Skeleton Crew? Look, I'll watch it. It looks pretty good. I'm sorry. It was 105 degrees in here. That's why I'm sweating into my glasses and I can't see because I'm old. But in terms of watching that stuff, I mean, I'll watch it. I just don't understand the fascination with making Star Wars. That's why Andor, to me, it feels very adult. It's a wartime thing, and I like it. Anyway, Hunter says Brian Fuller's billed as co-creator of Discovery, but all he had was a basic idea. How does that work? Oh, Hunter. Oh, contraire, my friend. No. No. Brian Fuller created Star Trek Discovery. He wrote the pilot script. Nicholas Meyer wrote the second episode, and he outlined the entire series. The series was hijacked and usurped from him, and they took most of his ideas and bastardized them and changed them. For instance, the micellular network, the spore drive, was repurposed from the original ideas that Brian Fuller and his original team came up with, which was they were using the micellular network to terraform planets. That they changed enough. He didn't. He co-created everything. I would say it was stolen from him. Now, I understand Brian can be exacting in where I've never worked with him. I'm a huge fan of his. I'm a huge fan of his work. Hannibal's one of my favorite horror-themed series ever to be broadcast. But he did. By the way, I've read all that material, and it's very interesting what was changed and what wasn't. But he co-created Discovery. Even the design of this Discovery was his idea. Even though they ruined it, the design of the Discovery was taken from Ken Adam, the production designer Ken Adam, and believe it or not, Ralph McQuarrie, from the aborted Planet of the Titans Star Trek movie that even predated Star Wars, where Toshio Mifune was going to play Klingon. That was going to be directed by, why am I drawing a blank on his name? Right Stuff, one of my favorite directors, and I can't. Philip Kaufman, who made the 1978 Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Man, I am getting old. Anyway. So Thomas Logan says, Bobby, why don't you pitch an Uncanny Suspects Deadpool and Wolverine addition to Reynolds and Levy? They already shouted out your work. We need more BTS. That was really nice of them. I don't think they knew that I made it. You know, they just had it in the they had it in the annals of what it was they were making. So they used it. I mean, we just and I have to say, some of that behind the scenes footage from X-Men 1 I didn't shoot. To give credit where credit is due, producer Tom DeSanto actually shot a lot of that footage himself, and his assistant Maddie Granger shot some of that footage. So I inherited that footage, and we were the first people to be able to use it, and some of it was used later by others after us. So just to be clear, Tom Jr. Jackson says, "Happy birthday, Rob." Are you canon in the MCU? I didn't appear in the MCU, so I am not canon. Darth Plato, our resident historian, says, have you seen Crisis on Infinite Earths parts 1, 2, and 3? I have. I enjoyed them, sort of. It's not the comics I read and fell in love with when they first came out. Roger Paulson, his name is Roger Paulson, sends in a super sticker. Thank you for that, Roger. Do people ever say that? I know it's Robert Paulson, but I can't look at the last name Paulson with an R without thinking about Fight Club. Daren from Minnesota says, $2 to you for praising Hannibal. Amazing reboot. Hannibal is one of the greatest reimaginings of a previously existing IP to ever exist. What Brian Fuller and his team did with Thomas Harris's books, they gender swapped, they race swapped, they sexuality swapped, all kinds of things, and nobody said anything. Know why? Because it was fucking awesome. That's what good writing does. You can do whatever you want if the writing is great. And in the case of that, it was so very great. So let's jump into this article I wanted to read, and you'll be wondering, why does this have anything to do with Wolverine? But keep Wolverine in mind when I read this. And once again, Brandon Sanderson, who, if you know him, he is an incredibly prolific writer, and my friend Stubble McShave, friend of the channel, had turned me on to him, has sent me works of his, and he is an incredible fantasist, and he's made tens of millions of dollars on YouTube from his fan base. So, I mean, on YouTube, on Kickstarter, by creating, using Kickstarter. He has a role-playing game that's made millions and millions of dollars recently. But anyway, he's also an incredible fantasist and a great writer, and I wanted to share this with you. This is an article from his own blog, Brandon Sanderson's Second Law. A few years back, I wrote an essay on creating magic systems that I titled Sanderson's first law. It had to do with the nature of foreshadowing as it relates to solving problems with magic. In that essay, I implied that I had other laws for magic systems that I'd someday talk about. Well, that time has come, as I finally distilled my thoughts for the second law into an explanation that will work. I'll start, however, by noting that none of these laws are absolute, nor am I the only one to talk about them. By calling them Sanderson's laws, I'm merely referring to them in the way I think of them. They are rules I try to live by when designing magic systems for my books. There are a lot of ways to write, and the only real laws are the ones that work for you. These work for me. I think they're actually all principles of good writing, not just writing as it pertains to magic systems. However, because magic systems are one of the things I most like to toy with in my writing, I have designed them in such a way that they encourage me towards stronger and more interesting magic in my fantasy books. The law. Sanderson's second law can be written very simply. It goes like this. Limitations are greater than powers. Or if you write it in a clever electrical notation, you could say it this way. But let me say that again. Limitations are greater than powers. Let's do some explaining here. When people describe a magic system, they usually talk about what it can do. Let's use a very well-known example. Superman. Yes, superhero abilities are a magic system. In fact, many of them make for good examples since many of them are well known in society and the scope of their powers is fairly well pinned down. If I were to ask you about Superman's magic, you'd probably talk about his ability to fly, his super strength, the lasers he can shoot from his eyes. You may go from there to his invincibility and perhaps some of his lesser and more inconsistent powers. But if we stick with those four, we've got a pretty strong setup for what Superman is capable of doing. However, is this what makes Superman interesting? I'd put forth that it is not. There are lots of people with magic powers who can fly and who are invincible. There are a lot of strong, fast, or smart people. What makes Superman interesting, then? Two things. His code of ethics and his weakness to kryptonite. Think about it for a moment. Why can Superman fly? Well, because that's what he does. Why is he strong? Comic book aficionados might go into him drawing power from the sun, but in the end, we don't really care why he's strong. He just is. But why is he weak to kryptonite? If you ask the common person with some familiarity with Superman, they'll tell you it's because kryptonite, this glowing green rock, is a shard from his homeworld, which was destroyed. The kryptonite draws you into the story, gets you into who Superman is and where he comes from. Likewise, if you ask about his code of ethics, what he won't do, rather than what he can do, we'll go into talking about his family, how he was raised. We'll talk about how Ma and Pa Kent instilled solid values into their adoptive son, and how they taught him to use his strength not to kill, but to protect. Superman is not his powers. Superman is his weaknesses. What this means for writers. Now, that explanation above is a descriptive point. It illustrates a concept, but it is just an example working backward. And yet you find this concept repeated time and time again in fantastical fiction or fantastical movies. It isn't what the heroes can do that is most important to who they are, but what they have trouble doing, or what they can't do. The Lord of the Rings is not, when you boil it down, about Gandalf's magical powers or even Aragorn's orc-slaying skills. It's about the hobbits, arguably the weakest, physically and magically, of the people in the books. It's about Aragorn's struggle to become king. The films, it should be noted, played this concept up much more than the books did, as the director realized Aragorn became far more interesting when he was reluctant to become king. His weakness gave him much more depth than his abilities. Now, this concept won't hold in every example, and more importantly, the average reader will miss the concept entirely. That's okay. This law is meant for writers or creators. When you're designing a magic system, it is important to be working on new slants on powers. However, the truth is that it's virtually impossible to come up with a magical effect that nobody else has thought of. Originality, I've seen, doesn't come so often with the power itself as with the limitation. Take the Wheel of Time, for example. This is a very popular epic fantasy series and one I've long loved and had the privilege of being a part of. The magic system at its core is actually rather generic. People can manipulate the Aristotelian elements, fire, earth, water, air, with the commonly added fifth element of spirit. The core is not original. It's the limitations, costs, and weaknesses of the magic system that bring us more fascinating elements alongside the best plot hooks. In order to manipulate these 5 powers, practitioners draw forth threads of them, and then weave the different powers into complex patterns, which then accomplish a goal. I wonder where I've seen that recently. This is a limitation of the magic. Instead of merely willing something to happen, then having it happen, that practitioners must use skill and knowledge and take time to create what they're making. It also gives a visual component to the magic system, always an excellent addition, and beyond that, ties the magic into the cosmology of the world. In the Wheel of Time, the mythology of the setting teaches that everyone's lives are threads woven into the pattern of time. On top of this, Robert Jordan added one of the most powerful costs to a magic system that I've ever read. Men who use the magic go slowly insane. This cost is wonderful, as it makes the magic worth something. It forces the characters to make tough choices, and then it shows real story-based ramifications. These are the sorts of things you should be looking for as a writer designing magic systems, or as a reader who is curious about the workings of fiction. An excellent limitation of a magic system will do several things. Struggle. It will force the characters to have to work for their goals, which makes the writing simply more interesting and the characters more sympathetic. In addition, if a magic is limited, the characters will need to be more clever to overcome their problems, and you, as a writer, will need to force yourself to be more clever in writing. For example, in Mistborn, the practitioners of the magic can move things with their minds, basic telekinesis. However, there are 2 important limitations. The objects must be metal, and the magic practitioner can only push them directly away or pull them directly toward themselves. The weight of the object is very important. A light object is pushed away, a heavy object pushes you away. Suddenly, with these limitations, the characters are forced to work harder, and in working harder, the written scene becomes much more interesting. Instead of a ho-hum scene with a character doing something abstract, the author ends up writing a scene where a character has to be very aware of their surroundings, has to place themselves very precisely, and has to work to achieve their goals. The nature of the magic encourages better writing. Tension. An excellent magic system limitation will increase tension. Superman fighting an enemy is honestly not very tense. Superman fighting an enemy with kryptonite is far more tense. Batman fighting an enemy is not very tense. Batman fighting an enemy who's playing off his inner fears, the current Batman's biggest weakness being his psychological problems, suddenly becomes far more interesting. Limitations give us tension. Too often I see new authors leaving out excellent opportunities like this. From there, they end up writing bland scenes with magic that happens abstractly in ways we can't relate to as readers. Now, if I might chime in here, all of these things and these laws, Sanderson's laws, I think are vitally important for we imagination connoisseurs when we are consuming our favorite video games, books, movies. And one of the problems with, say, our favorite IPs, whether it's Doctor Who, whether it's Star Trek, whether it's Star Wars, when you have new creators that come in and change the lore willy-nilly, it's one of the most difficult things for we as imagination connoisseurs of our favorite franchises to accept, because it's frankly fucking bullshit. And that's why lore is so important. It's the lore, it's the limitations, it's the way things work in the universe that makes the stories attractive. Limitations are greater than powers. And when you have creators that come in and just willy-nilly work on these franchises, and I call this fraudulent creation or insincere creation, they don't take the time to learn the limitations of their own universe, and they, quite frankly, they wreck it. Because they feel like, what does it matter? I don't have to adhere to this. And they also change when they come in and you see characters. For instance, I think the people writing Strange New Worlds have completely ruined the character of Spock. They don't understand the character of Spock, so they decided, because they are, well, quite frankly, fucking dumb in terms of how they're writing the character of Spock. They don't understand the character. They've decided, because they understand, well, we have to saddle him with learning disabilities and make him more autistic so he's more relatable to people today. No. That's dumb. And that shows you have a fundamental lack of understanding of the character. And that's why he's been written poorly. And it's been driving me crazy. He's been written poorly since 2009. which I don't want to get off on a Star Trek rant here, but I could. But apply that to any of your favorite IPs, especially Star Wars. Star Wars has a lore with the Force that has been changed recently, and it's frustrating because you ask yourselves, you didn't create this lore, and you're playing fast and loose with it, and we've been watching this for 50 years, and you're coming in here and telling us something that isn't the case. Now, an argument can be made that, okay, new creators can change the lore, but the thing is, they didn't create the universe or the lore in the first place, so it feels disingenuous when they do it. It also feels that there's a lack of creativity because they haven't learned to work within the established parameters of the universe that they're playing in. Now, I'm of the opinion that, well, Rob, what does it matter? I mean, let creativity flow. If you want to let creativity flow, create your own fucking universe. Create your own fucking lore. Don't come in there and tell me that the lore that I've been following for most of my life is being changed by you numbnuts. Don't fucking do that. That's why a lot of fandom rejects things, because they're trying to willy-nilly, for whatever reason. They might have a political reason for changing lore, ideological reasons, whatever. It's all bullshit, and it is violating Sanderson's law here. So anyway, let's talk about depth. You can do this with powers too. You can do this one with anything. However, my experience has been that great limitations require a little more stretching to explain. That forces you as a writer to create more depth to your world and characters. If you have a character whose power is the ability to fly, but then you add a limitation, she can only fly when she is happy, for example, then character depth will result. Suddenly her mood is directly tied to the plot of the story. Her very personality is going to be involved deeply in her ability to accomplish things with her magic. Limitations versus weaknesses versus costs. I've been lumping all kinds of different things under the heading of limitations for this essay. However, it's useful to consider these elements in different lights. I generally think of the limiting factors of magic systems under 3 headings. Limitations. These are the things that, for one reason or another, the magic simply cannot do. Superman cannot see through lead, for example. Every magic has basic limitations, defined simply as limited scope of the power. If magical glasses can let you see a mile, then the limitation is that they don't let you see further than that. However, in regards to designing magic systems, I suggest that the limitations be more encompassing than symbol parameters. Yet those delineations of what magic can and cannot do are important, and that is where you begin. However, one of the tricks to designing a truly engaging magic system is in the final touches of those limitations. I'm not saying they always need to be rational. Having a rule-based magic system isn't about rationality, but consistency. Of course, rationality is always advisable, but sometimes impossible. We are talking about magic, after all. Let's look at a magic system with interesting limitation. David Edding's magic, known as the Will and the Word. Now, this is basically an unbounded magic system with very few limitations other than the strength, skill, and endurance of the practitioner, alongside the occasional conservation of energy quirk. However, it does have one rather intriguing limitation. You can do practically anything, but you cannot unmake something. You can't command something to be not. I've always liked this limitation because of its flavorful addition to the magic system. Rather than just being another boundary, you can't use the magic when you're too tired. A similar basic limitation, it is an evocation of what the magic is about and what it means. This is the power of creation. It cannot unmake, and anyone who tries to use it to unmake is destroyed by the very nature of the power itself. In seeking limitations, look for things that have good ties to the nature of your world. Also look for things that will force your characters and you as a writer to stretch in solving problems. Resist the urge to add new powers or remove limitations in order to solve problems. Make the characters use what they have in new and innovative ways. Without limitation, there is no innovation. Now, weaknesses. Weaknesses are different from limitations. Weaknesses are things that enemies can exploit. Rather than being things the power cannot do, they are things the power is vulnerable to. The obvious example from the essay earlier is kryptonite. I realize this is just a matter of semantics. In a way, a weakness is just another limitation. I believe it is helpful for the writer to look at them differently. However, it is not a weakness that your magic allows you to jump 100 feet into the air, but not 200 feet. That's simply what the power does. The bounds it has. It is a weakness, however, if your ability to jump into the air leaves you vulnerable in some way, such as turning off your other powers. Perhaps one needs to focus all of his energy on a single act. Weaknesses are more tricky to build into a magic system. I find it difficult to keep them from seeming simplistic or silly. As good as kryptonite is for explaining the importance of limitations, it's become a cliche of easy storytelling. Need a weakness for your hero? Just take away their powers in certain circumstances. I suggest avoiding such simple weaknesses. Once again, the purpose of building those weaknesses is to create a better story. Yes, a weakness can be a good way of checking a hero who has grown too powerful, but in the case of most magics, I suggest allowing the limitations to be what force the issue, not suddenly added weaknesses. Here I would ask you, how many times and how many shows and how many movies have you seen where a character with some kind of power, some kind of magic, some kind of something loses them? It happens in every single show, ever. And it's, like Brandon would point out, it's a cheap and easy way, and it can be done well, or it can be done cheap and easily. The One Ring, these are costs. The One Ring makes you more covetous and paranoid the longer you hold it. And beyond that, if you use it to turn invisible, the evil powers can sense where you are. These things are what we call costs. Using the magic or being associated with it has a cost. These costs can be more abstract, you go crazy by using magic, or more concrete. If you run out of spice, you can no longer travel faster than light in space. The distinction here is how much wiggle room the author has. In the first example, what it means to be insane is left up to the author's discretion. There are a lot of different types of insanity, and how quickly someone goes insane and what it means to be insane are things that, as a writer, you can play with. In the second example, the cost is more concrete, locking the author into a certain specific cost. If it takes 3 magic beans to make the doorway appear, your character has to leave 3 magic beans, or has to have the 3 magic beans. That's it. Both are useful for different reasons. Costs are very important to consider. Readers naturally expect to be a cost, and a lot of times new writers skimp on giving their magic one. However, do be aware that if your cost is too drastic, it can lead you to never being able to use the magic. If casting a spell causes one of your grandparents to die, then we're just not going to be able to see that spell used very often in the book. It's easy to lock yourself in with a cost, as it can hinder flexibility. Well, that's what I wanted to read in this particular article. As always, the articles that I read are in the description of this show. Why did I want to read that to you? Well, one of the things that fascinates me and one of the things that I've been obsessed with is storytelling. Why does especially fantasy storytelling? When I say fantasy, it's funny. Somebody said to me, I called superhero movies fantasies. I mean, superhero movies are fantasy. They're adjacent to science fiction and horror, but they are fantasy. You don't need hobbits and dragons to have a fantasy story. Any story about It's a Wonderful Life is a fantasy story. Meeting Angels, one of my favorite movies of all time. Wim Wenders' Wings of Desire is about the friendship 2 angels have and what happens when one of them decides to become mortal. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. Fantasy is fantasy, and superhero stories are fantasy. But the reason that I wanted to read that is because let's now take all of the things that Brandon Sanderson said and apply them to Wolverine. First of all, obviously, Wolverine is a skilled fighter. But because he is a mutant, he has a healing factor. Now, what's interesting about his healing factor is you can play with that healing factor depending on what happens to Wolverine. And they have frequently used Wolverine's healing factor. Now, we saw it in X-Men 97. But, oh, man, I will. When Magneto, when they went back into X-Men 1, and Magneto pulled out. So, another thing, other than the healing factor, we know that Wolverine's bones are laced with adamantium, making him very difficult to destroy. Combine the adamantium, his claws, with his healing factor, he is formidable indeed. Now, when I was reading the comics, I mean, there are times, and I'll admit this, when I've read comics, and I'm like, oh, shit. Like, I'll exclaim something where I'll be like, oh, my, no fucking way. Like, Alpha Flight 12. If you haven't read Alpha Flight 12, first, I won't say what it was, but I was stunned. I was stunned by the end of Alpha Flight 12. I was stunned by the Born Again storyline, Frank Miller, the end of that first issue. You just shouldn't have signed it. I was like, no fucking way. You know, there have been times I get that into comics where I've read certain comics and I'll get to, I mean, obviously for me, the biggest, and now it seems silly to say this, Watchmen 11. I mean, when Watchmen came out, I was convinced and I'm still kind of convinced, and I understand, I know it's a riff on the Architects of Fear, and I get it, but the whole Watchmen comic was such elevated. I mean, now it's hard to explain, you know, was it 86? I think it went into 87, what it was like to read Watchmen when it first came out. I mean, it was so, first of all, it was so dense, it was so interesting, there was so much going on in so many different ways. It's meta commentary. I think it's issue 5 where it's the same panel design forward and backward. I mean, I can't say enough about Watchmen. It seems cliche to say it now, but I was there, man. I was reading it on a month-to-month basis, and I was fucking locked the fuck in. And when I got to issue 11, I'm not some Republic serial villain, Dan. Do you think I would explain my master stroke if there was any hope of you interfering with it? Whatever he says, I did it 32 minutes ago, 36 minutes ago, 34 minutes ago. I was those characters. I was Dan Dryberg. I was fucking Rorschach. I was like, and I turn the page and it's just, you see their faces and it just goes to white. I mean, I literally, I'm getting chills thinking about when I read that for the first time, man. I was like, fuck. Well, when fucking Magneto pulled, you know, it's because maybe it was because I never thought of it before. Like when Magneto pulled off Wolverine's adamantium skeleton and tore it out of him. I know we saw it in X-Men 97, but I mean, it seems silly to say for a grown man to say this, but it was one of those moments. It was one of those moments that was perfect in its conception because it was Magneto doing it. And just the whole thought of it, you're like, that's, of course, I mean, on one hand, you have to admire Magneto for doing it in the first place, but also what you did to poor Logan. I mean, and it was one of those moments where it was one of the great in different ways. I mean, the Watchmen moment was more of an intellectual moment, but the Wolverine moment was this like, holy shit. I mean, it was unbelievable. I mean, it was unbelievable. I mean, you know, there was other, and maybe it seems silly. People are like, Rob, really? You know, but that's why you read comics, you know, for those shit. I mean, not just those shit moments, but when you get them in the medium of comic books, it's pretty special. It's pretty special because you've been following these stories, you've been contemplating these stories, and you think you know what's coming, and then something happens like that, and you're like, fuck, and, you know, and you love it. And you love it because of what Brandon Sanderson was describing. That's why you love it. You know, you know what Wolverine, and we've all thought, like, if Wolverine's head gets chopped off, will it grow back? Like, can you put them together? I mean, how much damage can Wolverine take if he gets shot in the head? The bullet comes out. I mean, how far do you go before? If you threw Wolverine into the sun, would he burn up into ash and never come back? I mean, and that's what, when you're a kid reading X-Men comics, you have conversations with your friends about this, about all superheroes' powers. Like, how far can it go? Could Superman fight the Silver Surfer? Was a big one in my neighborhood, or the Hulk. You know, who would win? And we're not the only ones. The writers themselves. I mean, Superman and Flash. Come on, they even had it in the movie The Flash. You know, it's the kind of thing where you're like, okay, fastest man alive against Superman. I mean, that's actually the question with powers and limitations is you want to know who would win, and the question is you don't necessarily know, depending on who you like more. Is the Flash faster than Superman? Superman can fly. The Flash is limited by, I guess he has to be on the ground. So, who has more wind resistance? Flash is standing upright. Superman's flying like, I mean, you know, there's all these variables, but that's what comic book fans are into. Well, Wolverine, you know, despite the fact that he has these stoic characteristics of the great, I mean, look, man, I'm never too far from my love of Wolverine. Here's my So-So Toys Old Man Logan, of course carrying a little Hulkling on his back there. But I've got a lot of Wolverine 6-scale figures. This is an unlicensed figure, but imagine my delight at seeing Old Man Logan and Deadpool and Wolverine. I mean, they basically gave this figure Hugh Jackman's face, but I was pretty happy about it. But that's one of the things about Wolverine. You love the fact that he's a romantic hero. He holds a torch for Jean Grey. He's been in love before in Japan. Mariko? Was it Mariko? And we saw that in The Wolverine. Not to the extent you probably wanted to, but, so he's got all of these great traits as your classic male hero. But then he's also a mutant. He also has a healing factor. And, what do? They take away his adamantium skeleton, and then he doesn't have it anymore. And suddenly Wolverine's got more of a limitation. And then, of course, you take away his healing factor, and Logan, it finally does him in, but you realize his pain. And then, of course, that's breaking the rules because you're taking his healing factor away. But in the case of Logan's, he had it for a long time. You get old. Things go away. Things don't work. Luckily, in my case, that hasn't happened yet. But that's what makes heroes and villains and all of that interesting. So, all of these things, I've been thinking about. The enduring power of Wolverine, and basically what it comes down to in my mind, he's just a fucking badass. You just love him, and he'll rip people apart too. He gets busy. I mean, he has the power to tear you asunder if things go wrong. But it was interesting. I was thinking about this, and then, of course, I've often read articles from Medium on here, and anybody can write for Medium, really. But I always look there because they have specifically a fanfare. It's like fanfare.pub, which is a subheading on Medium, which deals with genre stuff. And just this week, it was published 5 days ago, Kieran O'Brien wrote an article, What Makes Wolverine Such an Enduring Character? And I thought I would delve into it because obviously it's not too difficult to understand why Wolverine is an enduring character. But I thought that I would share this article with you guys because I've been thinking a lot about Wolverine this week, probably an inordinate amount. Maybe want to open up all my Hot Toy Wolverine figures, of which I have 4. This is 5th. And I need to get the 70s Wolverine, which I don't have. From Days of Future Past. I have the original Days of Future Past figure, but I got to get that Wolverine figure too. And now, of course, there's new Wolverine figures. There's 2 more that Hot Toys announced from Deadpool and Wolverine. There's probably going to be more. Personally, please give me the Age of Apocalypse Wolverine. I mean, I couldn't... Or give me the Cross and give me Crucified Wolverine. I would totally buy that. But anyway, so let's jump into this article because I think it was fun to share. What makes Wolverine such an enduring character? And Kieran O'Brien wrote this. And by the way, before I jump into this article, I just want to go back and I want to talk about what it was like to hear Hugh Jackman. It was Dougray Scott was going to be the original actor playing Wolverine, but because he was running along on Mission Impossible 2, he had to be replaced by Brian. And Hugh Jackman took over, and I've even had a clip from one of our documentaries that's been up on the YouTube channel. You can go, it's in the shorts section. He talks about how when he took the role, he didn't know anything about Wolverine. And of course, people objected because he's over 6 feet tall, and Wolverine is supposed to be short, as they showed you what it would look like. And using modern effects technology, I don't think Brian would have ever shrunk Hugh Jackman down a la Hobbit style, because there'd be no verisimilitude there, and everybody, comic book fans, were bitching and moaning and complaining about Wolverine's portrayal. But now everybody loves Hugh Jackman's portrayal of Wolverine because, short or tall, Hugh Jackman embodies what that character is. And I don't think anybody, whoever plays Wolverine in the MCU going forward, a young Wolverine, is going to have a hard act to follow. But I just wanted to say that. But people were pissed. Comic book fans were pissed. Look, anybody cast as a great... Sanderson's law, maybe law number 87, should be that anytime a famous or beloved comic book character is cast, no matter who is taking over that role, fans will hate them. Fans will hate them, unless it's like Patrick Stewart being Xavier. But fans probably, for the most part, will hate them until they see them, and then they'll either fall in love with them or still hate them. But let's jump into this article. Again, this article was What Makes Wolverine Such an Enduring Character? And uh-oh, I keep doing that, and I don't want to fuck that up. No, come on, man. I'm an idiot. So here we go. Hold on. Let me just stretch this out. There we go. What makes Wolverine such an enduring character? By Kieran O'Brien. Hugh Jackman, continuing to play Wolverine in Deadpool and Wolverine 24 years after he first played the character in X-Men in 2000, got me thinking. We've seen a lot of mutants appear in the dozen or so X-Men films over the years, like a lot. Yet, only one has endured in the zeitgeist. Only one has consistently drawn audiences, received a trilogy of spin-offs, and starred in what many consider to be the greatest superhero movie of all time. Why does Logan, a.k.a. Wolverine, possess such staying power? How is he so different to the rest of the X-Men, none of whom have individually received close to the same level of adoration from fans and general audiences? In Robert McKee's book, Character, The Art of Role and Cast Design for Page, Stage, and Screen, the author and writing coach talks about character dimensions. Dimensional characters arouse our curiosity by making us wonder how two sides of a contradiction can live within one person. That, in turn, makes them unpredictable and all the more fascinating. From moment to moment, who knows which side will show up? In fiction writing terms, a character dimension is a contradiction. For a nearly universal example, look at the contradiction in Breaking Bad between Walter's two selves, the family-loving chemistry teacher and the merciless drug lord Heisenberg. Of course, character dimensions don't have to be so overt. A dimension could exist internally in a character's motivations or goals too. Character X might desire romantic companionship, but what they really love most is their alone time. Character Y might be a horrible boss, but it's only because they were the victim of workplace bullying in the past. Hopefully you get the idea. The more oscillating dimensions a character has, the more kinds of stories a writer can tell with them. Of course, there are only so many dimensions that are worth exploring in a single story before things get muddy. But in long-form storytelling, like television and comic books, multiple dimensions in one character could be argued as the key to success. So what dimensions exist in the character of Wolverine that make him such an enduring, interesting character? Here are 5 that come to mind. Young and old. Logan's mutant powers grant him extra long life. Despite being born sometime in the 1800s, Logan only looks to be in his 40s. In the comics anyway, Hugh Jackman being a mere human means that his on-screen age is variable, but this doesn't negate the fact that he's playing a guy roughly 200 years old. How does this dimension add to Wolverine's character? Well, there's inherent pathos in the fact that Wolverine has had to watch so many of his friends and family age and die while he remained young. But his old age also grants his character a unique wisdom and worldview, one that conflicts with how young his character looks. This conflict between Logan's knowledge and perspective versus his youthful appearance cause a reader or viewer to lean in. Simply put, it's interesting. There's a reason that the comic book arc Old Man Logan by Mark Millar and Steve McNiven is one of the most popular Wolverine stories and also the basis for much of Logan. In this alternate universe story, the creators turn the dial on Logan's oldness all the way up. Watching Logan exist inside a failing body is fascinating because it's such a sharp contrast to how he's always been portrayed. They couldn't have done this story if the old young dimension wasn't ingrained in how we typically view Wolverine. See also, in Logan, an aged and weathered Logan faces X-24, a clone version of himself at a younger age, which visually dramatizes the young-old conflict in Wolverine. Logan's old age and youthful physique also provide writers an endless playground for action-packed Wolverine stories. Picking any time in the last 150-odd years and asking, what was Logan up to then, is a fun way to generate stories. Logan has lived many varied lives: samurai, teacher, soldier, mercenary, all of which has contributed to his enduring appeal as writers continue to discover new ways to explore his character. Savage and civilized. Become the animal. William Stryker in X-Men Origins Wolverine. X-Men Origins Wolverine is a messy exploration of Logan's days before becoming an X-Men. I will say this, I love the first 20 minutes of X-Men Origins Wolverine, seeing his past. X-Men Origins Wolverine is a messy exploration of Logan's days before becoming an X-Man that isn't worth watching unless you're a big fan of the character, but it does attempt to engage with the warring instincts inside Logan. On one hand, the villains encourage him to embrace his animalistic urges, while his lover Kayla pleads for Logan to show mercy and rationality. Wolverine is prone to berserker-style rages as a result of his mutation. He's not an elegant fighter most of the time. There's lots of screaming and wild slashing whenever Logan draws claws, and during the moments he's prone to losing his sense of self in his bloodlust. I point to his appearance in X-Men Apocalypse as an example of a completely wild Wolverine. What makes this such an interesting concept is that during his lucid moments, Logan doesn't want to fight. He fights because he has to, not because he's good at it or because he likes it. He's killed indiscriminately before, he's fought in multiple wars, but since joining the X-Men, Xavier has helped tame him to a certain extent, or at least redirect his anger in a way to benefit mutant kind. To bring up Logan and X-24 again, X-24 is a mindless, savage clone that attacks Logan and Laura when they're literally living on a farmhouse with a nice family who make them dinner and give them beds and treat them like fellow humans, i.e. engaging in proper civilization. It's a dark reflection, or example, of Logan's savagery intruding on his latest attempt at being civilized. Of course, he's not called Wolverine for nothing. The animal he's named after is ferocious by nature, and there's nothing anybody can do to totally eliminate that element of Logan. That's okay. For the audience, it's Wolverine's struggle that makes this aspect of the character so interesting. We've all wanted to lash out before, but know that the right thing to do is maintain civility. We empathize then with someone whose unwanted nature is to lash out, who can cause serious destruction if he loses control, even for a minute, but does everything he can to maintain control. He's a lover and a fighter. Logan has had many romances in his over century of life. The one that's been developed the most over the years is, of course, with fellow X-Man Jean Grey, with whom he develops an infatuation despite a relationship with Scott Summers, Cyclops. There's also Mariko, Silver Fox, and Itsu, with whom he has a son. Many of Logan's romantic relationships are doomed. Logan's presence in these women's lives invariably invites life-threatening conflict. There's an inherent tension whenever Wolverine enters into any romantic relationship. How is this going to fall apart? Logan can't seem to stop pursuing personal fulfillment in relationships, which naturally lead to the nuanced question, should he even try? The question of whether Wolverine deserves love is interesting, given his questionable past and the idea of withheld love possibly being just a punishment for his past deeds. But even more interesting is the debate around him entering a romantic relationship in the first place, if his lovers mostly end up dead. Both of these questions are explored through Jean Grey. She is perhaps one of the few people powerful enough to be able to survive being Wolverine's lover, but her relationship with Scott prevents this. Well, it prevents it most of the time. Recent comics have touched on the idea of Jean being in an open relationship with both Scott and Logan. Of course, the lover-fighter dynamic extends beyond romantic attachments. Wolverine loves. He loves his family and his friends. In his ideal world, he'd never have to bear his claws in anger again. It's not a great movie, but in X-Men Origins Wolverine, the first thing Logan does when he quits the mutant Black Ops team is settle down with Silver Fox and try and live a normal life. Unlike many of his bloodthirsty mirror image antagonists like Sabretooth and Omega Red, Wolverine's fantasy is to live in peace. Only his loved ones, being in constant danger for being mutants, is what forces Logan to fight, and that inherent conflict is his personality keeps him interesting. Lone wolf and a team member. Unlike mutants such as Cyclops, Storm, and Jean Grey, Wolverine's membership in the X-Men is not a given. From his first comic book appearance in a Hulk comic devoid of mutants to his first big screen appearance in X-Men, as a transient, Logan has always come to the X-Men as an outsider. He's solitary by nature, traumatized, abrasive, and doesn't open up to people easily, which makes him functioning on a team difficult. Nothing exemplifies this better than the fact that Wolverine nearly always his ongoing solo comic book, focusing on his adventures away from the X-Men, and that he received a trilogy of movies where he was the sole focus. Wolverine receives this special solo treatment in part because he's a more dimensional character than the rest of the X-Men, but giving him a mix of solo and team adventures also adds a new dynamic subversive. Wolverine has both been a loner for so long before joining the X-Men and has also been a member of teams a lot less friendly than Xavier's Children of the Atom, that there's an immediate sense of catharsis whenever Wolverine starts to function successfully on the team. When Wolverine is integrating well, that means that he has a handle on his more savage side. There's a moment early on in the recent X Lives, X Deaths of Wolverine, where Logan, while readying himself for a mission with Jean Grey, and Xavier, narrates how much he loves and respects the two mutants. I might be twice as old as the Professor, but he's as close as I've got to a father. Then there's Jeannie. Maybe nobody knows me better. Maybe nobody's ever loved me better. Every time my guts tell me I'm better off alone, my heart knows better. Maybe the broken bits of us come together and form a kind of family. And that's from Wolverine, X Lives of Wolverine, #1. Interestingly, it's the lack of conflict between Logan and the others here that make these words and moments so meaningful. Wolverine's unique position as a loner at heart makes his moments where works on a team hit harder emotionally. He's a victim and he's a weapon. Wolverine's healing factor, rage, and claws make him somewhat of a perfect living weapon, and that's not counting his unbreakable adamantium skeleton. Many leaders over the years have recognized the quality in Logan to put into use. Even the usually benevolent proponent for mutant and human coexistence, Charles Xavier, isn't exempt from directing Logan's propensity for violence to further his own goals. At a surface level, Wolverine's power set makes him an appealing comic book character. There's no other word for it. Wolverine's cool. Although he possesses one of the most unique combinations of fantastical abilities in comic book history, coming up with superpowers is relatively easy compared to the task of making those powers thematically resonant for the character. Being a mutant, Logan developed most of the trademark powers naturally, all except his most recognizable feature, his adamantium claws and skeleton. A key component of Wolverine's backstory is the traumatic process through which he received his adamantium skeleton. The film version of this process is depicted quite effectively in X-Men Origins Wolverine, but you'll find a more satisfying version of the story in the Weapon X story arc in the comic. The process is essentially pure torture. If you've ever thought it would be cool to have Wolverine's powers, ask yourself first if you could... Actually, it's better in X2, man. Come on. Ask yourself first if you could survive the pain of having liquid hot metal drilled into every bone in your body. Of course, physical torture is only half of the dehumanizing techniques employed by the Weapon X directors on Logan. In order to pacify and control him, he has his memory wiped and is given fake memories to replace them. This disorienting psychological torture still affects Logan in the comics to this day. He can't be as fully sure of his memories are real or not. Undercutting the benefits of such compelling power set with a cost as serious as the torture that Logan has had to endure adds an interesting layer of complexity to the character of Wolverine. Finding the downsides of a power has the potential to enormously increase the reader's ability to relate to a superhero, as is the case with Wolverine. We aren't jealous of Logan, we empathize with the suffering he went through. Positioning him as the victim of a tremendous abuse in order to contrast his weapon-like powers is extremely thematically resonant too. And that's all I wanted to read of this article. It's almost to the end. I know it was long, but those are the articles I wanted to read. And it brings me back, and whatever you guys think of Wolverine, I would love to hear it in the chat or super chats or in the comments below. Leave your comments below. Say what you think. But I think that does it goes a long way. Both Sanderson's Second Law and that brief overview of Wolverine, of why the character is so appealing. And I think, and I understand that Deadpool and Wolverine is a Deadpool movie, but, and I know we would be hard pressed to show a more emotionally resonant Wolverine than we saw in Logan, the movie. But one of the things that I was disappointed by, and I guess, I mean, I liked Deadpool and Wolverine. I was entertained by it. I laughed. But they had this sort of faux at the end, this sort of faux, oh, here's all the people that we were saving, you know, and I just didn't feel it. I had fun with Deadpool and Wolverine, but I wanted to feel it more, and I think they wanted us to feel it more. But I think that Wolverine was really shortchanged. Hugh Jackman was obviously doing a wonderful job portraying Wolverine, but I felt that we were being shortchanged by the character, or by the filmmakers. I wanted more from Logan because I love the character. And it was great to see Hugh Jackman playing Logan again. He was great in the role. But I felt that it would have been a really interesting story. And look, the two of them coming together to stop the villain, to stop Cassandra Nova from succeeding was great. It was fine. But it would have been really interesting if at the core that these two characters, they had a more resonant... It's silly to say with the Deadpool and Wolverine movie, and it's going to make $1 billion, so really what does it matter? The filmmakers succeeded. And for me to sit there and nitpick, hey, it's just a movie, right? But having been reading Wolverine for the better part of my life, you know, I'm always looking for stories to shoot higher. I always want them to be better and more resonant. And I do think when the MCU, to me, you know, people can nitpick Endgame all they want, but, and I've said this a million times, watching Infinity War and Endgame together, to me, is the ultimate example of now, I love the original Superman. I do love Logan. I love Alex Proyas's The Crow. To me, those are all great comic book movies. But to take everything I love about comic books and superheroes, what Infinity War and Endgame do, and what the MCU did at its height was a trick I thought I would never see. And I can't get enough of all of these characters together. We all love those gangbang comics, whether it was annuals in the summer, whether it was JSA, JLA crossovers when I was a kid, once a year, and it all worked. And to see Infinity War take all these characters, what was that, the 19th? It was the 19th MCU movie, and Endgame was the 22nd, because we had Ant-Man and Captain Marvel between the two. I mean, it was a marvel that those two movies worked as well as they did. And I always want, it can always be a little bit better. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that loved Deadpool and Wolverine, but it left me a little cold. The humor was there, but I would like to have seen Wolverine as a character handled a little bit better. Just a thought. Let's see what you guys have to say. I know a lot of people have a lot of things to say, and let's see what you all are saying. Let's go back. Wow, a lot of people are saying a lot of things. So hang on. Andy Montemare, I think I got that right. Rob, in your opinion, of the brilliant Deep Space Nine Root Beer Federation comparison. I don't know what the Root Beer Federation comparison is. I love DS9, but I'll tell you, a lot of people talk about Star Trek and how Deep Space Nine flies in the face of the ethos of Roddenberry. And I would say no, because what Deep Space Nine does is, what does a post-scarcity utopian civilization do when confronted by an enemy bent on its destruction? And I would say that the way that Cisco and the characters in Deep Space Nine handle, ultimately, the Dominion War is fantastic. They're truly good people, whether you're looking at Odo, whether you're looking at Kira, whether you're looking at Cisco himself, Bashir, Dax, Quark, Rom, Nog, all those characters. And then later Gowron, even a Klingon. You see how Gowron and Worf in Deep Space Nine define honor. And I think one of the things I've always loved about Deep Space Nine and where it goes is it feels like these are real people trying to do the right things in the time of war. And that's why In the Pale Moonlight is such a great episode of Star Trek, because at the end you see the cost of war, the personal cost of war, when you have to compromise everything you believe in for the greater good, which is what Cisco does. When he looks into that camera and says, I can deal with it. No, he can't. He'll be haunted by that decision his whole life. And that when he erases his log, that was his confession that maybe somebody would have seen, but he realizes no one can see that confession. And he accepts blame, and he will be haunted forever by that decision. That's why it's a great episode. And so, I love Deep Space Nine, and I love the thought that was put into it. Darth Plato says, there's a contradiction in Crisis Part 3. Rob, the movie stated that everyone has an alternate self across the multiverse except for Darkseid. Darkseid exists only in one universe. However, the movie showed the universes of the Super Friends and Justice League Unlimited erased from existence. Both those universes have their own version of Darkseid, and therein lies the contradiction. The writers wanted to kill the past. Fuck them. Speaking of changing lore and stuff, how about J.J. Abrams putting a mining ship in his movie? A really, really big mining ship. It's just a Death Star by another name. It's as if J.J.'s only interested in one thing. I'm going to blow shit up. He is only interested in one thing. That's what was unfortunate. Star Trek was never interested in only one thing, but J.J. Abrams was. He wanted something simple. Uh-oh, I have a drinking problem. So, maybe people want me to go back to drinking booze all the time in these late nights, which I don't do anymore. Not because I don't want to. I choose not to. Not in an AA sort of way either. I just give better program when I'm drinking water. And I've got 3, look at this, 3 of these jugs of water lined up. Keep that skin clean, you know. Shellcrow says, Wolverine is Marvel's Shane. Yes, I love that. I totally agree with you. Mario Lopez, all the way from Portugal. First of all, Mario, say hi to your mom for me. Secondly, Mario Lopez has been a member for 40 months on this channel. Mario, you're a great imagination connoisseur. Scott Bartholomew says, New Trek is lore that's been bastardized. Oh, it has. Yeah, it has. Because all these creators want to come in and change the lore and make it, like, what's weird is they all want to make it modern. They're like, oh, I'd like to deal with learning disabilities, so let's make Spock, let's give him a learning disability, not just that he's a man of 2 worlds, which, I mean, again, I've said this before, but the idea that Dr. Mbenga gives Spock a harp, hey, why don't you learn music? It'll calm your nerves. I mean, what a bastardization of the character of Spock. Spock was a musician. Why? Because he's an artist at heart. And he plays music, and he knew how to, he sight reads music. He didn't learn music because some human being gave him a thing when he was having a problem on the ship with some alien influence. It's like the dumbest fucking shit ever. Way to diminish a character. Again, in a 3rd season episode, Requiem from Methuselah, Spock sits down at a harpsichord and can sight read Brahms and plays a waltz. He was studying music from a small child as an art form because that's what Vulcans do, and that makes him a badass. But no one ever watched the episode Requiem for Methuselah that's working on Strange New Worlds. Anyway, I have a problem. I try and keep it away from Star Trek. I can't do it. MajorChaiChai says, I saw Incendies tonight. Great film, and it broke my heart. Thanks for broadening my movie horizons, Robert. Denis Villeneuve's Incendies is one of his, I think it is his first film. If you haven't seen Incendies, you got to watch it. Go in cold. It's not a science fiction movie. Don't read anything about it. Just trust the Bobster on this one. Go watch it like MajorChaiChai did. Just do it. Do it. And see? She's listening to me. By the way, I got Last Year at Marienbad on 4K. Woohoo! Rick Alfonso coming at us from Northern California. Rick, what's up, buddy? Wolverine's an animal. Cowboy, samurai, Terminator, hero. All in one. Only one other Marvel character is as multifaceted, and that's Moon Knight. Right, Rob? Well, Moon Knight's not a mutant. Look, I liked Moon Knight when he was the more romantic version of Batman. More of a film noir character. And then they've completely changed him. Scott Bartholomew says, target date for 1,000. Well, we're, 17 days away. 17 days. 17 long nights if you're a Prince fan. And I am. I'm working on that, but I'm trying to get more interviews. It's tough. I've been so damn busy, it's hard to get the kind of interviews I want to get. Thomas Logan. Our own Thomas Logan says, Claremont and Frank Miller cracked it during a car ride from San Diego to Los Angeles. He's a Ronin who doesn't want to be a Ronin. He finds a suitable master in Xavier and finds purpose with the X-Men. Yeah, that's true. And if you read the Logan miniseries, the one that has the cover where he's like, yes, come here. That miniseries is terrific. Claremont wrote it. Frank Miller drew it. It's fucking great. And Thomas Logan, you're absolutely right. They really define the character in that miniseries. It's terrific. And that's exactly right. MajorChaiChai says that Wolverine's appeal is that he is a blue-collar everyman. That is true. He really is. But he's also an extraordinary human being because he is kind of immortal, and he is, not immortal entirely, but also, he does have that blue-collar sensibility that on the street kind of like knows the grindstone, truck-driving personality. But he is also special, too. Darth Plato says, Wolverine the Musical, coming soon. My God, I hope not. I hope not. Baron Bob Iger. Thanks for being you. Well, thanks for a $20 super chat or super sticker. That's very nice of you to say. Very much appreciate that. Very generous. Thank you. let's see if I want to make sure I've got everybody's. Roger Paulson sent in another super sticker, and that's very nice of you. That's two for. I love those super stickers. You've got good ones. Those characters are cute. I need to learn what the names of these things are. I know they're all like, I never know. But that's very nice of you to say. Always a pleasure. But I think, everybody, I think I've said everything I need to say tonight. I want to talk about Wolverine. I was looking to do something new, something different. And it allowed me to storytelling itself is so important to me. And this was a way to talk about, in addition to talking about Wolverine and how stories are created, how great stories are made, and also talk a little bit about the Wolverine controversy, which I hadn't talked about. And, it's just a strange time. We live in strange times. And, it's going to get stranger. Planners. But anyway, I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank Tom Jr. Jackson for being a great moderator. I want to remind all of you to come back tomorrow for Let's Get Physical Media. Dietz and I are going to start an hour early. So we're going to start at 10 a.m. Pacific tomorrow. I have this monster pile. I don't even know how. Like some days I figure, what am I going to talk about on Let's Get Physical Media? And then suddenly I've just got a giant stack of stuff that just shows up. It's amazing. So we're going to do that tomorrow. Let's Get Physical Media. And I implore all of you, once again, I can't wait to go hear the piece of music that I played from True Noir from my composer, Alexander Bornstien. Have not heard it. And for those of you, people want to know, like, what is this fully immersive audio drama that we're doing? And I try and explain it to people. It's like a movie, but without the pictures. The screenplay was written like a movie. We've cast it with actors that are from your favorite movies and TV shows. And it is a 7-hour, fully immersive experience that is very akin to its tone of Chinatown. And it's a very serious story about a detective navigating the criminal element of Chicago and different forces that are pushing and pulling at one another. Al Capone is a character. Frank Nitti is a character. And in a way, the story is a sequel to The Untouchables and to Road to Perdition, which Max Allan Collins also wrote. And it's probably the thing that I've had the most creative control over, so it's the most expression of me creatively. I mean, I didn't write the script. Max Allan Collins did. My producer, Christine Sheeks, helped me cast all this. It was, as all great casting people do, she had all these great ideas. And, of course, my other producers, Mike Bodden, my co-founder of Imagination Connoisseurs Unlimited and a co-creator of True Noir with Max Allan Collins and myself, we're hoping to bring you guys what we think is great storytelling. I sit here and bitch and moan and complain about other people's work. And I wouldn't be able to criticize other people's work if I wasn't creating my own. That's just a personal thing for me. And I'm really excited about True Noir. I think if you like those kinds of stories, and you can buy it in any way, shape, or form, you can get a digital download, you can get the physical media. Mike thinks I'm crazy, but I want to do a vinyl box set with 11 vinyls in it. Each episode comes on its own record. And then the soundtrack album. And the quality of the music is another facet. So if you could go over to Kickstarter and support it, True Noir, or go to truenoir.co, and it will take you directly to the Kickstarter page. And you can also look up ICU. I think it's ICU.co to see Imagination Connoisseurs Unlimited, our new website, which will be a place you can start sending me letters again. But please support True Noir if you can. Maybe you don't want to. It's not your thing. Totally understand. But I'm really proud of it. And I'm going to play you out another piece of music that I haven't heard either. So remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear, and all you have to do is listen. And thanks to everybody for generously supporting this channel. I very much appreciate it. And once again, here is a piece of music. It's longer this time that I have never heard because I can listen to it on the headphones. But I'm going to play this out. Once again, this is Alexander Bornstein's score for True Noir, original music.